At my daughter's promotion party, my son-in-law told the security guards to remove me. "This old opportunist only shows up when he needs something," he shouted. When the guard came toward me, he recognized me. "I saw you in Forbes Billionaires." Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I stood outside the gleaming glass building on Fifth Avenue, adjusting my simple navy blazer one more time. The fabric was worn at the edges, but it was clean and pressed. At 66, I've learned that appearances can be deceiving, though tonight I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was just trying to be a father, celebrating his daughter's success. Natalie had gotten the promotion she'd been working toward for 3 years, Senior Vice President of Marketing at one of Manhattan's most prestigious advertising firms. I was proud beyond words, even though she hadn't called to tell me herself. I'd heard it through her co-worker's mother, who happened to be my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She'd mentioned it while we were both checking our mailboxes last Tuesday. "Your Natalie got that big promotion," she'd said with a smile. "My daughter Sarah says the whole office is buzzing about it. They're throwing her a celebration party this Friday." I'd smiled and thanked her, but inside my chest had tightened. My own daughter hadn't thought to invite me to her celebration. Or maybe she had wanted to, but Ryan had convinced her otherwise. My son-in-law had made it clear over the past 5 years that I wasn't exactly welcome in their lives. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt endless. I clutched the small wrapped gift in my hands. A vintage Mont Blanc pen I'd found at an estate sale. Nothing too expensive or flashy, just something meaningful for a woman who'd always loved to write. Even as a little girl, Natalie would scribble stories in every notebook I bought her. The reception area was buzzing with well-dressed professionals holding champagne glasses and laughing loudly. The space was all modern lines and expensive art, the kind of place where my simple clothes would stand out like a sore thumb. I scanned the crowd for Natalie's familiar face, finally spotting her near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. She looked radiant in a burgundy dress I'd never seen before, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She was laughing at something a colleague was saying, and for a moment she looked exactly like her mother had at that age. My heart swelled with pride and longing. I made my way through the crowd, dodging servers with trays of hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. A few people glanced at me curiously, clearly wondering who the older man in the off-the-rack blazer was doing at their upscale gathering. "Natalie," I called out when I was close enough for her to hear me over the chatter. She turned and I watched her face cycle through surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like panic. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Ryan appeared at her side as if he'd materialized from thin air. His perfectly styled hair and tailored suit made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. At 34, he had the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no about anything important. "Christopher," he said, my name sounding like something distasteful in his mouth. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited." "I wanted to congratulate my daughter," I said simply, extending the gift toward Natalie. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." Ryan's hand shot out, intercepting the gift before Natalie could take it. "That won't be necessary. As you can see, this is a professional gathering. Natalie's colleagues are here to celebrate her achievement." The implication was clear. I didn't belong among her colleagues. I was somehow beneath this crowd of advertising executives and their significant others. "Ryan, please," Natalie said quietly, but she didn't reach for the gift. She didn't meet my eyes either. "No, Natalie, this is exactly what I'm talking about," Ryan said, his voice rising slightly. "This is why I told you not to mention the party to him." He turned to me, his expression hardening. "You only show up when there's something to celebrate, when there's attention to be had. Where were you when Natalie was working 18-hour days to get this promotion? Where were you when she was stressed and exhausted?" His words hit me like physical blows. I'd wanted to be there for all of those moments, had called and texted offering support, but those messages had gone unanswered. I'd assumed Natalie was too busy, too focused on her career to maintain much contact. I never realized Ryan had been intercepting my attempts to connect with my own daughter. "You're nothing but an opportunist," Ryan continued, his voice now loud enough that people were starting to stare. "A sad old man who shows up with cheap gifts, trying to get credit for someone else's hard work." I felt my face burning with humiliation. Around us, conversations had stopped. Natalie's colleagues were watching with the kind of horrified fascination people have for car accidents. "That's enough," I said quietly, but Ryan wasn't finished. "Security," he called out, waving toward the 2 uniformed guards stationed near the elevators. "We need this man removed from the premises. He's harassing my wife and disrupting our private event." My heart sank as one of the security guards started walking toward us. This couldn't be happening. I was about to be thrown out of my own daughter's celebration like some kind of vagrant. The humiliation was crushing, made worse by the fact that Natalie stood there silent, not defending me, not speaking up. The security guard reached us, a tall black man in his 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to recognize the pain in the situation. "Sir," he said gently, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I set the gift down on a nearby table and turned to follow him. But then, something unexpected happened. The guard stopped walking and turned to look at me more carefully. His eyes widened slightly, and he tilted his head as if trying to place me. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "but aren't you Christopher Hartwell?" I nodded, wondering how he knew my name. His expression changed completely. "I saw your profile in Forbes last month. You're the Christopher Hartwell who made the billionaire list." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Around us, the party noise seemed to fade as people processed what they'd just heard. Ryan's face went completely white, then a sickly green color. "There must be some mistake," Ryan stammered, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. I looked at my son-in-law, this man who had just humiliated me in front of my daughter and her colleagues, this man who had called me a sad opportunist and had me escorted out like trash, the same man who was now realizing he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. "No mistake," I said quietly, my voice steady for the first time all evening. "Though I can understand the confusion. I've never been one for showing off." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Ryan's champagne glass slipping from his trembling fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could see Ryan's mind racing, trying to process what he'd just learned. Around us, Natalie's colleagues whispered among themselves, phones discreetly appearing as people undoubtedly searched for my name online. Natalie herself looked like she'd been struck by lightning. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the resumed party chatter. "Is it true?" I nodded slowly. "I've never lied to you, sweetheart. I just haven't told you everything." The truth was, I'd built my fortune quietly over the past 30 years, one careful investment at a time. It started when Natalie was just 5 years old, after her mother died in that car accident that changed everything. I'd used the insurance money to buy my first rental property, a small duplex in Queens that nobody else wanted because it needed work. While other single fathers might have spent their evenings at bars or dating, I spent mine learning about real estate, studying market trends, and slowly building a portfolio. Every weekend when Natalie was with her grandmother, I was renovating properties, fixing plumbing, painting walls. I never hired contractors when I could do the work myself. By the time Natalie was in middle school, I owned 6 properties. By high school, it was 20. When she graduated college, I had 43 rental units across 3 boroughs, and I'd started buying larger commercial properties. The cash flow was substantial, but I lived the same modest lifestyle I'd always maintained. I drove the same Honda Civic for 12 years. I bought my clothes at department stores during sales. I lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment in Queens where Natalie had grown up, even though I could have afforded a mansion in the Hamptons. The only indulgence I allowed myself was setting aside money for Natalie's college fund, which grew larger every year, though she never knew its true size. The Forbes article the security guard mentioned had caught me off guard. I'd been avoiding publicity for decades, but when my real estate empire crossed the billion-dollar mark last year, some enterprising journalist had started digging. They'd tracked down property records, business filings, and suddenly I was on a list I'd never wanted to be on. Christopher Hartwell, the invisible billionaire, the headline had read. The Queen's landlord, who built an empire in silence. I'd hoped Natalie wouldn't see it. Not because I was ashamed, but because I'd spent her entire life trying to give her something Ryan was now taking away. A normal relationship with her father that wasn't complicated by money. Looking at Ryan now, I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was probably calculating every dismissive comment he'd made about my little apartment and my retirement savings. He was remembering the times he'd insisted on paying for dinner because he felt sorry for the old man living on Social Security. The irony was devastating. Ryan worked as a mid-level marketing executive at a pharmaceutical company, making a decent salary of around $120,000 a year. He and Natalie lived in a nice but mortgaged two-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that cost them $4,000 a month in rent. They drove a leased BMW and charged their vacations to credit cards they struggled to pay off. Meanwhile, I collected rent from properties worth over $1.2 billion. My monthly passive income was more than Ryan made in 2 years. The simple truth was that I could have bought the building where this party was taking place without it making a dent in my portfolio. But Ryan had seen my modest lifestyle and assumed poverty. He'd seen my preference for simple clothes and quiet evenings and interpreted it as failure. For 5 years, he'd treated me like a burden, the embarrassment he had to tolerate because I was Natalie's father. "Dad," Natalie said again, stepping closer to me, "why didn't you ever tell me?" The question broke my heart, because the answer was complicated. I'd watched too many wealthy parents destroy their relationships with their children through money. I'd seen kids who never learned to work for anything, who became entitled and disconnected from real life. I'd wanted Natalie to build her own success, to feel proud of her achievements without wondering if they were really hers or just products of her father's wealth. "I wanted you to know your own worth," I said quietly. "I wanted you to succeed because of who you are, not because of what I could give you." Ryan's face had cycled through several colors by now, settling on a pale gray that matched his eyes. "This is impossible," he muttered. "You live in that tiny apartment. You wear clothes from Target. You drive that ancient Honda. Money doesn't have to change how you live," I replied. "It can just change what you can do for people you care about." The weight of that statement hung between us. Ryan was beginning to understand that for 5 years he'd been insulting and dismissing a man who could have changed their lives with a single phone call. More than that, he was realizing that his treatment of me had probably influenced Natalie's distance from her father. I'd lost count of the holidays I'd spent alone, the birthdays that passed without calls, the grandchildren I might never have because Ryan had convinced my daughter that her father was somehow inadequate. He'd made her ashamed of me, and I'd been too proud to correct his assumptions. The security guard who'd recognized me was still standing nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the situation he'd inadvertently created. "Sir," he said to me quietly, "would you like me to escort anyone else out?" I looked at Ryan, who was now sweating despite the air conditioning, and then at Natalie, who looked like she was seeing her entire life from a new perspective. "That won't be necessary," I said. "I think I'll stay for my daughter's celebration after all." Ryan opened his mouth as if to object, then closed it again. What could he say? That he didn't want his wife's billionaire father at her promotion party? That he preferred to keep insulting the man who could buy and sell his entire company without thinking about it? But the damage was already done. The look in Natalie's eyes told me she was starting to remember things differently now. Phone calls that had gone unreturned, invitations that had been declined, holidays I'd spent alone while they went to Ryan's family gatherings. How many times had I offered to help with something, only to be told they had it handled? How many times had Ryan intercepted those offers, painting them as inappropriate intrusions from a father who didn't understand their financial independence? The worst part was that I'd respected their wishes. When they'd insisted on paying their own way, I'd stepped back. When Ryan had made it clear that my help wasn't welcome, I'd honored that boundary. I thought I was being a good father by letting them build their own lives. Instead, I'd allowed Ryan to create a narrative where I was the absent father, the one who didn't care enough to be involved. And Natalie, trusting her husband, had believed it. The party continued around us, but it felt like we were trapped in a bubble of tension. Natalie had pulled me aside to a quieter corner near the windows, while Ryan hovered nearby, clearly trying to figure out how to manage this crisis. I could see him calculating, probably wondering if there was still a way to spin this in his favor. "Dad, I need to understand," Natalie said, her voice shaking slightly. "All these years, when Ryan said you weren't interested in helping us, when he said you preferred to keep your distance, what exactly did he tell you?" I asked gently, though my heart was already breaking in anticipation of her answer. She looked back at Ryan, who was pretending to check his phone while obviously listening to every word. "He said you thought we should handle our own problems, that you believed it would make us stronger." Her voice got smaller. "He said you told him directly that you didn't want to be the kind of father who enabled his adult children." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Those weren't just misunderstandings or miscommunications. Those were deliberate lies, carefully crafted to make Natalie believe I didn't want to be part of their lives. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "I never said any of those things to Ryan. In fact, I've had very few conversations with your husband at all over the years." Her eyes widened. "But he said you two talked regularly. He said you specifically asked him to handle communications between us because direct contact made you uncomfortable." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that made me sick. Ryan hadn't just discouraged my involvement in their lives. He'd systematically isolated Natalie from me by creating an elaborate fiction where I was the one choosing distance. "Do you remember my 70th birthday last year?" I asked. Natalie's face crumpled. "You said you wanted to keep it small. Ryan told me you specifically didn't want us there because big celebrations made you anxious." "I spent that day alone in my apartment, wondering why my only daughter didn't call," I said quietly. "I had planned to invite you both for dinner, but when I called, Ryan said you were busy with work and couldn't be disturbed." She stared at me, her hand pressed to her mouth. "He never told me you called." "What about when you had that emergency appendectomy 2 years ago?" "I drove to the hospital as soon as I heard, but Ryan met me in the parking lot. He said you were resting and had specifically asked not to see anyone." "I kept asking why you didn't come," she whispered. "I thought maybe you didn't know, or that you didn't think it was serious enough." Each revelation was like watching a house of cards collapse. I could see Natalie mentally reviewing years of interactions, reframing them with this new information. The birthday cards that never arrived, the Christmas gifts that were apparently declined on her behalf, the college graduation ceremony, where I'd sat alone in the back because Ryan had told me she wanted to keep the guest list small. "There's more," I said, though it pained me to continue destroying whatever trust she still had in her husband. "Last spring, when you were having trouble with your mortgage payments, do you remember telling me about it?" "I never told you about that," she said, confused. "You didn't. But Mrs. Chen's daughter, Sarah, works at your bank. When she mentioned that you'd been asking about payment deferrals, I immediately called to offer help. Ryan answered your phone and said you were too proud to accept money from family, that it would hurt your self-esteem." Natalie turned to look at Ryan, who had gone pale again. "We almost lost the apartment," she said to him. "I was working overtime for months to catch up on payments." "You knew my father had offered to help?" Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Natalie, you have to understand the context." "What context?" Her voice was rising now, attracting attention from nearby guests. "What possible context justifies lying to both of us for years?" I watched Ryan scramble for an explanation, and I realized something that made the situation even more tragic. He wasn't just malicious, he was pathetically insecure. Looking at him now, I could see the fear in his eyes, the terror of a man who had built his identity around being the provider, the successful husband who didn't need help from anyone. My quiet wealth threatened that identity completely. If Natalie knew her father could solve their financial problems with pocket change, what did that make Ryan? He'd probably convinced himself that he was protecting their marriage, protecting his role as the man of the house. But protection built on lies isn't protection at all. It's just another form of prison. "I was trying to help you build your own life," Ryan said desperately. I didn't want you to become dependent on handouts. I wanted us to succeed on our own merits. Gio, by lying to me? Natalie's voice cracked. By making me think my father didn't care about me? I never said he didn't care, Ryan protested weakly. You let me believe it, she shot back. For 5 years, you let me believe my father was distant and uninterested, while he was actually trying to reach out to me. I stepped closer to my daughter, my heart aching for the pain in her voice. Natalie, there's something else you should know. The college fund I set up for you when you were born? It's still there. It's grown to about $400,000 over the years. I've been waiting for the right time to give it to you, maybe for a house down payment or when you decided to have children. He stared at me in shock. $400,000? I've been adding to it every year, along with the returns from my investments. I wanted to make sure you'd always have options, always have security. Ryan's face had gone from pale to red. You never mentioned any college fund. Because you never gave me the chance, I replied evenly. Every time I tried to discuss Natalie's future or our family's finances, you changed the subject or ended the conversation. I could see Natalie processing all of this information, her mind racing through years of memories that now had completely different meanings. The small gifts I'd given her that Ryan had dismissed as inadequate. The modest restaurant meals where I'd insisted on paying, which he'd attributed to old-fashioned stubbornness rather than genuine desire to treat my daughter. The quiet way I'd lived, which he'd interpreted as evidence of limited means rather than personal choice. There's one more thing, I said, knowing this would be the hardest part. Last month when you got this promotion, I wanted to do something special for you. I tried calling to arrange a celebration dinner, maybe at that French restaurant you loved when you were younger. Le Bernardin, she said automatically. It had been our special place when she was in high school, where we'd go for important occasions. Ryan told me you were too busy with your new responsibilities to maintain social obligations with family. He suggested I wait a few months until things settled down. Natalie's face crumpled completely now. I would have loved that, she whispered. I kept waiting for you to say something about the promotion. When you didn't call or send a card, I thought maybe you didn't think it was important enough. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Ryan had not only stolen years of relationship between Natalie and me, but he'd made us both suffer for it. He'd made me believe my daughter preferred distance, and he'd made her believe her father didn't care about her achievements. I sent a card, I said quietly, and flowers. They were returned to sender with a note saying the recipient had moved with no forwarding address. Natalie turned to Ryan with a look of pure betrayal. We never moved. We've lived in the same apartment for 3 years. Ryan's carefully constructed world was collapsing around him, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all the lonely holidays, all the missed conversations, all the times I'd wondered if I'd somehow failed as a father. Why? Natalie asked her husband, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you do this to us? Ryan's face went through several expressions before settling on something between panic and defiance. The party continued around us, but I could feel the energy shifting as more people became aware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Some guests were discreetly moving closer, pretending to admire the artwork while obviously eavesdropping. Natalie, we need to discuss this at home, Ryan said, his voice tight with forced control. This isn't the place for family drama. Family drama? I repeated, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. Is that what you call 5 years of systematic lies? Natalie was staring at her husband like she'd never seen him before. Answer the question, Ryan. Why did you do this? He looked around frantically, clearly hoping for some escape from the situation he'd created. When none appeared, he tried a different approach. Look, maybe I made some mistakes in judgment, but my intentions were good. I was trying to protect our marriage, our independence. From what? Natalie demanded. From my father caring about me? From becoming dependent on handouts, Ryan shot back, some of his earlier arrogance returning. Do you have any idea what it would have done to our relationship if we'd known about his money from the beginning? You'd have run to Daddy every time we had a problem instead of working through things together. I watched my daughter's face as she processed this warped logic. The idea that love and support from family was somehow a threat to her marriage, that accepting help from her father would have weakened her as a person. "You mean like how we worked through almost losing our apartment?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or how we worked through me taking a second job to pay for your MBA classes?" Ryan flinched. "That's different. Those were investments in our future." "My father offering help was also an investment in our future," Natalie said. "An investment in his relationship with his daughter." I decided it was time to share something else I'd discovered, something that made Ryan's motivations even clearer. "There's another reason your husband preferred to keep me at a distance," I said quietly. "Ryan, would you like to tell Natalie about the loan application you submitted last year?" The color drained from his face completely. "What loan application?" "The one where you listed your income as significantly higher than it actually is. The one where you claimed to have family financial backing that didn't exist." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a screenshot I'd saved months ago. "I own the building where First National Bank has their headquarters. When large loan applications mention family wealth, the bank sometimes does additional verification. That's how I learned about your attempt to secure a $500,000 business loan using my daughter's name and a fictional version of our family's financial situation." Natalie grabbed the phone from my hand, staring at the screen. "You applied for a business loan? For what business?" Ryan's silence was answer enough. There was no business. Just like there had been no family emergencies that required borrowing against their credit cards. No urgent investments that had mysteriously failed to pay off. "Where's the money, Ryan?" Natalie's voice had gone ice cold. "All those times you said we were struggling. All those times I worked overtime while you were supposedly managing our finances. Where did the money go?" I watched my son-in-law crumble in real time. The confident, dismissive man who had me thrown out of the party an hour ago was now sweating through his expensive shirt, looking around desperately for an exit that didn't exist. "There were some investments that didn't pan out," he said weakly. "What kind of investments?" Natalie pressed. Ryan's mouth opened and closed several times before he finally admitted, "Cryptocurrency, day trading. I thought I could multiply our savings." The confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Natalie was staring at her husband with a mixture of horror and disgust that I'd never seen on her face before. "You gambled away our savings," she said, her voice barely audible. "While I was working 60-hour weeks, while I was stressing about mortgage payments, you were gambling with our money." "It wasn't gambling," Ryan protested desperately. "It was calculated risks. I was trying to build something for us, to create the kind of wealth that would make us independent." "Independent from what?" I asked. "From family? From people who love you and want to help?" "Independent from charity," Ryan snapped, finally showing his true colors. "Independent from pity handouts from rich relatives who want to feel good about themselves." The words hit like a slap. After everything that had been revealed, he still saw my desire to help my daughter as some kind of ego trip rather than genuine love. Natalie took a step back from her husband, and I could see something fundamental shift in her expression. "Is that really what you think? That my father's love is charity?" "I think rich people use money to control others," Ryan said, doubling down on his delusion. "I was protecting you from becoming another spoiled rich kid who never learned to work for anything." "Spoiled?" Natalie's voice cracked with emotion. "I've worked for everything I have. I earned this promotion. I paid for my own college education with scholarships and student loans that I'm still paying off. What exactly did you protect me from?" "From this?" Ryan gestured wildly around the room. "From finding out that none of your achievements matter because Daddy could have just bought you a company to run." The complete wrongness of his statement left me speechless for a moment. This man had spent 5 years isolating my daughter from me based on a fundamentally twisted understanding of what wealth and family meant. "Ryan," I said quietly, "I never would have bought Natalie a job. I'm proud of her precisely because she earned everything herself. The money I have doesn't diminish her accomplishments. It just means she doesn't have to struggle unnecessarily while building her career." But he wasn't listening anymore. I could see that his entire worldview was collapsing, and instead of accepting responsibility, he was lashing out. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said, his voice rising. "Now that she knows about your money, everything changes. Our whole relationship becomes about what we can get from you instead of what we can build together. Maybe our relationship was never as strong as you thought, Natalie said quietly. If it couldn't survive me having a relationship with my father. Well, the finality in her voice seemed to penetrate Ryan's panic. He looked at her with something approaching desperation. Natalie, don't let this destroy what we have. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, figure out how to move forward. Move forward from what? She asked. From you lying to me for 5 years? From you gambling away our savings? From you deliberately sabotaging my relationship with my father? Ryan turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Genuine fear, not just of losing Natalie, but of facing the consequences of his choices without the safety net of her income and stability. Christopher, you have to understand, he said desperately. I was trying to be a good husband. I was trying to build something real with your daughter. You were trying to build something on a foundation of lies, I replied. And now that foundation is crumbling. Around us, the party had essentially stopped. Natalie's colleagues were pretending to mingle, but everyone was watching our family drama unfold. I realized that Ryan's public humiliation of me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of proving his superiority, he'd exposed himself as a liar and a manipulator in front of all the people whose respect Natalie valued most. We're leaving, Natalie announced, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Ryan, we need to go home and have a very long conversation about our marriage. Ryan nodded eagerly, probably thinking he still had a chance to salvage the situation once they were alone. But I could see something in my daughter's eyes that he couldn't. The same determination that had driven her to earn this promotion, the same strength that had carried her through years of believing her father didn't care about her. She wasn't just angry. She was done. 3 days passed before I heard from Natalie again. When she finally called, her voice sounded hollow, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Dad, can we meet? Just the two of us? We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Queens, not far from the apartment where she'd grown up. It seemed fitting somehow, returning to the place where our relationship had begun before Ryan had systematically dismantled it. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usual professional polish replaced by something raw and vulnerable. How are you holding up? I asked as I sat down across from her. She let out a bitter laugh. I feel like I've been living someone else's life for the past 5 years, like I was sleepwalking through my own marriage. I waited, sensing she needed to talk this through at her own pace. After we left the party, Ryan and I stayed up until 4 a.m, going through everything, she continued. Every lie, every intercepted phone call, every time he convinced me you didn't want to see me. Her voice cracked slightly. Dad, I missed you so much over the years. I thought I'd disappointed you somehow, that I wasn't the daughter you wanted me to be. The pain in her voice was like a knife to my chest. You never disappointed me, sweetheart, not once. You've always been exactly the daughter I hoped for. Then why didn't you fight harder? The question came out sharper than she'd probably intended. Why didn't you push back when Ryan was keeping us apart? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself for 3 days. Because I thought I was respecting your choices, I said slowly. When Ryan said you preferred independence, when he said you didn't want family interference, I believed him. I thought forcing my way into your life would push you further away. But you must have known something was wrong. 5 years, Dad. 5 years of barely talking. I nodded, the weight of those lost years settling on my shoulders. I did know something was wrong, but I also knew that your mother had died when you were so young, and I'd raised you mostly on my own. I was terrified of being one of those overbearing parents who couldn't let go. When Ryan presented himself as your protective husband who was helping you establish boundaries, I thought maybe that was healthy. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. He used your love for me against both of us. He knew you'd respect my wishes, so he fabricated wishes that would keep you away. What else did you discover? I asked gently. She took a shaky breath. The gambling was worse than he admitted at the party. It wasn't just our savings. He'd taken out cash advances on credit cards I didn't know about. We're $63,000 in debt, not counting the mortgage. The number hit me like a physical blow, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. While Ryan was gambling away their financial security, he was simultaneously preventing me from helping them, creating a crisis that could have been avoided entirely. There's more, she continued. I found emails on his laptop. He's been in contact with a divorce attorney for 6 months. What? The betrayal was staggering. He was planning to leave you? No, it's worse than that. He was planning to divorce me and claim spousal support. The attorney advised him that, given my income and his financial situation, he could potentially get alimony for several years. He laughed bitterly. He was literally planning to profit from ending our marriage. I sat back in my chair trying to process this new level of calculation. Ryan hadn't just been a weak man making bad choices. He'd been systematically planning to exploit my daughter financially while simultaneously sabotaging her relationship with her only family. But that's not even the worst part, Natalie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I found a life insurance policy he took out on me last year. $2 million with him as the sole beneficiary. A cold chill ran down my spine. Did you know about this policy? I signed something he said was related to his employee benefits. I didn't read it carefully because I trusted him. She looked up at me with eyes full of pain and fear. Dad, what kind of person takes out a life insurance policy on their spouse while planning a divorce? The implication hung in the air between us, too horrible to speak aloud. I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the warm cafe. Where is Ryan now? I asked. I kicked him out yesterday. He's staying at his brother's place in New Jersey. She pulled her hand away and wiped her eyes. He kept trying to convince me that we could work through this, that marriage counseling could fix everything. But how do you fix 5 years of systematic deception? How do you rebuild trust with someone who was planning to either divorce you for money or... He couldn't finish the sentence. You can't, I said firmly, and you shouldn't try. What he did wasn't a mistake or a series of bad judgments. It was a pattern of deliberate manipulation and exploitation. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, she said. The way he always insisted on handling our finances alone. How he discouraged me from staying in touch with college friends who might have known you were successful. The way he made me feel guilty for wanting to visit you more often. Those weren't signs you should have recognized, I told her. They were expert manipulations designed to isolate you. Ryan understood exactly what he was doing. Natalie nodded slowly. I've already filed for divorce. My lawyer says, given the financial deception and the gambling debts, I should be able to get out without taking on his obligations. What about the life insurance policy? Canceled yesterday. Apparently, there's a waiting period before policies pay out anyway, so even if... She shuddered. It doesn't matter now. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the full scope of what Ryan had done. It wasn't just about the money, or even the lies. He'd stolen years of relationship between Natalie and me, years we could never get back. Dad, I need to ask you something, she said finally. That college fund you mentioned, and all the times you offered to help over the years, were you hurt when you thought I was rejecting your support? The question opened a wound I'd been trying to ignore. Yes, I admitted. It broke my heart every time. I kept wondering if I'd done something wrong, if you were ashamed of me somehow. Wow, I thought you were ashamed of me, she said softly. Ryan convinced me that your distance meant you didn't approve of my life choices, my career, my marriage to him. The cruel symmetry of it was breathtaking. Ryan had made both of us feel rejected by the other, creating a void that he could fill with his own version of reality. There's something else I need to tell you, Natalie said, her voice getting stronger. Something I decided yesterday when I was going through all of Ryan's deceptions. I waited, sensing this was important. I want to start over with you, really start over. I want to know about your business, your investments, your life over the past 5 years that I missed. I want to understand why you chose to live so modestly despite being so successful. And I want you to know about my real life, not the version Ryan was filtering for you. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I nearly cried. I'd like that more than anything. I know it won't be easy, she continued. I'm probably going to need therapy to work through all of this. And I might have moments where I'm angry at you for not fighting harder to stay in my life. I understand, I said, and I want you to know that therapy is probably a good idea for both of us. We both need to process what happened and figure out how to move forward. She nodded, then looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. Hope. Will you help me with something? She asked. I want to understand your business. I want to learn about real estate investment and property management. Maybe we could work together someday. The suggestion took my breath away. Do you want to join the family business? I want to build something with my father, she said simply. Something real, something honest, something Ryan can never touch or manipulate. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had my daughter back. Not the polished professional who'd been keeping me at arm's length, but the curious, determined young woman I'd raised, the one who'd always wanted to understand how things worked. I'd love that, I told her. More than you know. We'll bust. 6 months later, I was sitting in my newly expanded office in Manhattan, watching Natalie review property acquisition reports with the same intensity she'd once brought to her advertising campaigns. She'd moved out of the apartment she'd shared with Ryan and into a beautiful one-bedroom place just 12 blocks from our new headquarters. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, and she'd emerged from it financially independent and emotionally stronger than I'd ever seen her. The Brooklyn portfolio is performing better than projected, she said, looking up from her laptop. Rental income is up 18% from last quarter, and the property values have appreciated faster than we expected. I smiled, remembering how nervous she'd been during her first week learning the real estate business. She'd approached it like she approached everything else, with meticulous research and unwavering determination. Within 2 months, she was identifying investment opportunities I'd overlooked and suggesting improvements to our property management systems that saved us thousands of dollars. What about the commercial project in Queens? I asked. The permits came through yesterday. We can start construction on the mixed-use development next month. She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. I have to admit, this is more satisfying than convincing people to buy products they don't need. It had taken time for us to rebuild our relationship. Those first few weeks had been awkward, both of us walking carefully around the wounds Ryan had created. We'd gone to family therapy together, working through years of miscommunication and hurt feelings. Slowly, we'd learned to trust each other again, to share our thoughts and concerns without worrying about hidden agendas or manipulated messages. The business partnership had been Natalie's idea, but I'd embraced it wholeheartedly. Having her involved gave the work new meaning, transformed it from a solitary pursuit into something we were building together. She brought fresh perspectives and modern approaches to an industry that sometimes resisted change, while I provided the experience and capital that made ambitious projects possible. "Dad, there's something I want to show you," she said, closing her laptop and pulling out a folder I hadn't seen before. "I've been working on this for the past month." She handed me a detailed business proposal for a new venture, affordable housing development specifically designed for single parents and their children. The project would use innovative construction techniques to keep costs low while creating safe, attractive communities with built-in childcare facilities and educational resources. "This is incredible," I said, reading through her meticulously researched plans. "You've thought of everything." "I kept thinking about how hard it must have been for you when Mom died," she said quietly. "Trying to raise me alone while building your business. If there had been housing specifically designed for families like ours, with support systems built in, maybe things would have been easier." The thoughtfulness behind the project moved me deeply. She wasn't just proposing a profitable investment. She was trying to solve a problem that had affected our own family, using our resources to help other parents who were struggling the way I once had. "How much would this first development cost?" I asked. "About $12 million for a 50-unit complex," she said. "The profit margins would be smaller than our luxury properties, but the social impact would be significant. And I think there might be tax advantages for affordable housing development." I looked at my daughter, this brilliant woman who'd inherited her mother's compassion and my business instincts, and felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with money or success. "Let's do it," I said. "In fact, let's plan for 3 developments instead of 1. Her face lit up with excitement. Really? You think it's viable? I think it's exactly the kind of project that makes wealth meaningful, I told her. And I think your mother would be proud of what you're trying to build. The mention of her mother brought tears to Natalie's eyes. But they were good tears this time, tears of connection rather than loss. There's something else, she said, reaching into her desk drawer. I want to show you this. She handed me a framed photograph I hadn't seen in years. The 2 of us at her high school graduation, both beaming with pride and joy. I remembered that day clearly. She'd been valedictorian, and I'd been bursting with pride as she gave her speech about the importance of perseverance and family support. I found this in a box Ryan had hidden in our closet, she said, along with all the letters you sent over the years, the birthday cards, the Christmas gifts. He kept everything, probably planning to use them as evidence of your interference if he ever needed ammunition for the divorce. I stared at the photograph, remembering how happy we'd both been that day, how close we'd felt despite all the challenges of the previous years. I'm having it enlarged and framed for the lobby of our new building, she said, a reminder of what real family looks like. The gesture was perfect, a reclaiming of our history that Ryan had tried to steal from us. Whatever happened to him, I asked. It was the first time either of us had mentioned Ryan in months. Last I heard, he was working as a sales associate at a car dealership in New Jersey, she said, without any apparent emotion. His brother got tired of supporting him, and the gambling debts caught up with him. His lawyer dropped him when he couldn't pay his fees. I felt no satisfaction in Ryan's downfall, only sadness for the waste of it all. He could have been part of something good, could have supported Natalie's relationship with me instead of sabotaging it. His insecurity and greed had cost him everything that mattered. Do you ever regret not seeing through his manipulation sooner? I asked. Natalie considered the question carefully. Sometimes, she said finally, but then I think about how strong I've become because of surviving it. I learned that I can rebuild my life from scratch, that I can trust my own judgment, that I don't need anyone else's validation to know my worth. She was right. The woman sitting across from me was stronger and more self-assured than the person who'd been married to Ryan. She'd emerged from the destruction of her old life with a clearer sense of who she was and what she wanted. Besides, she added with a small smile, if Ryan hadn't exposed himself so spectacularly at my promotion party, we might have gone on for years with that wall between us. In a weird way, his arrogance saved our relationship. I laughed, remembering the shock on Ryan's face when the security guard recognized me. I have to admit, there was some satisfaction in watching him realize he'd been insulting a billionaire. The look on his face was priceless, Natalie agreed, but the best part was seeing you stand up for yourself. For the first time in years, I saw my real father, not the diminished version Ryan had been showing me. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. Outside our office windows, the city sprawled beneath us, full of properties we owned and projects we were planning together. "Dad," Natalie said finally, "I want you to know that these past 6 months have been the happiest I've been in years. Working with you, rebuilding our relationship, creating something meaningful together. This is what family is supposed to feel like." "For me too," I said, meaning it completely. "I spent so many years thinking I'd failed as a father because you seem to prefer distance. Now I understand that love isn't about giving people space when they ask for it. It's about fighting for the relationship when something doesn't feel right. Next time someone tries to come between us," she said with determination, "we'll know better. Next time, we'll communicate directly instead of trusting intermediaries," I agreed. The promise felt solid, built on the foundation of hard-won wisdom and genuine affection. We'd both learned that relationships worth having are worth fighting for, that silence can be as destructive as conflict, and that love requires vigilance to protect it from those who would exploit it. As we packed up our work for the day, preparing to head to dinner at the French restaurant that had become our new weekly tradition, I reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a lonely man who'd convinced himself that solitude was the price of respecting his daughter's independence. Now I was part of a team, building something meaningful with the person I loved most in the world. Ryan had tried to steal our relationship, but in the end, he'd only revealed how strong it really was underneath all his manipulation. Some bonds, I'd learned, can't be broken by lies. They can only be hidden for a while, waiting for the truth to set them free.